In a world where the rich get richer and the poor stay poor, it's easy to feel like the game is rigged. But what if I told you that the very institutions meant to protect and serve us are actually working against us? That the powers that be are using every trick in the book to keep us down and maintain their grip on wealth and influence? Hi everyone, Florian the Pessimistic Historian here, and welcome back to my series on the history of labor. In the previous video, none of this is new. How the elite manipulate crises, like COVID-19, to undermine workers. We explored the striking parallels between the post-Black Death labor market in medieval Europe and the current post-pandemic world. We saw how the tactics used by those in power to resist workers' demands have remained remarkably consistent across the centuries, from legal restrictions to ideological propaganda. While modern workers don't have to worry about being put in the stocks or forced to remain on their employer's property, at least not yet, let's check in another decade. But while the fundamental struggle between labor and capital may be timeless, the modern economy presents a new set of challenges for workers. In this video, we'll delve into how factors such as globalization, the rise of the gig economy, the growing influence of recruiters and algorithms, and the role of external actors like the Federal Reserve and consulting firms have added new layers of complexity to the fight for workers' rights. As we navigate this rapidly changing landscape, it's essential to understand how these forces interact to shape the lives and livelihoods of workers around the world. Join me as we uncover the insidious ways in which the modern economic landscape is rigged against those who toil at its foundations, and shine a light on the systemic efforts to undermine workers' rights and social mobility. It's time to pull back the curtain and expose the truth behind the manipulated market. One of the most significant challenges facing modern workers is the need to compete with a global workforce. The rise of offshoring and the use of H-1B visas have allowed companies to exploit a vast pool of labor from around the world, often at a fraction of the cost of hiring domestic workers. This has placed immense downward pressure on wages and job security, as workers in developed countries find themselves in a relentless battle with their counterparts in lower-wage economies. Offshoring has become a powerful tool for companies looking to cut costs and boost profits, often at the expense of fair labor practices. So here's where I'm going to give a disclaimer that I really shouldn't have to give. But as I've noticed a sharp incline in anti-Indian sentiment this past year, it's unfortunately necessary. I ask that everyone reserve their hatred for the manipulated offshoring and H-1B visas on the Western entities that abuse them and not the workers, who, as you'll see, are coerced into trading temporary increases in quality of life for a life suffering under the same system. I'm going to describe a scenario which has become a universal experience for my fellow software developers. Companies implement layoffs or hiring freezes, then shift to hiring only Indian developers and QA. American resources become overextended, training new colleagues with promises of future relief that never materializes. When offshore resources start producing code, quality issues flood the queue, creating a cycle where American workers spend their time fixing problems that wouldn't have occurred if local talent had been hired. Ultimately, companies lose money and quietly abandon the scheme, leaving fewer American workers to handle increased workloads without additional compensation. This is frustrating, but my colleagues often take away the wrong message, that Indian developers just aren't as good. What they don't see is that we're only exposed to the worst of their workforce, because that's all our companies are willing to pay for. Most Indian tech workers prefer to work for Indian companies, and the best either end up at such companies or holding out for an H-1B visa. The lowest quality workers are generally absorbed by laughably awful consulting firms like Tata and Infosys, whose only goal is to undercut competition by offering insanely low costs to greedy Western tech companies, who are too ignorant to realize how much more they'll be paying in the long run for their hubris. American tech companies who do open offices in places like Bangalore still attract the worst talent because there's no oversight. One company I worked for bypassed observed coding challenges because the hiring managers were too precious to do Zoom calls with candidates outside of working hours. The result was that the candidates, many of whom obviously could not code at all, would just pay someone else to do the take-home test for them. The bad work we see from offshore resources in tech is not a reflection on the overall quality of professionals in that respective country, but rather the laziness and short-sightedness of our own company leaderships. While I'm not personally a fan of what the H-1B visa process has become, we must challenge the conspiracy theories and racist rhetoric that has begun coloring our side of the debate. While Indian nationals do account for 74.9% of all H-1B visas as of 2020, only 60% of that number are tech workers, with most of the remainder helping us fill much-needed medical care and research jobs. Our hospitals would collapse under the strain of our aging population without this injection of talent. India is the largest source of immigrants globally, with around 17.5 million Indians living abroad as of 2020. This high immigration rate is a double-edged sword, alleviating overpopulation but causing brain drain. Assocham estimates India loses $2 billion annually due to skilled immigration. And despite the way these workers are characterized in the media, it's not so much that these workers are pulled to Western countries, but pushed out by a job market that's even bleaker than our own. After all, their urban unemployment rate is a whopping 14.7%. Many H-1B workers would like to return home despite these challenges. The network's 2018 Decoding Global Talent report indicated that 40% of Indian professionals working abroad expressed an interest in returning to India within the next 5 years. And why wouldn't they? A 2020 MPI survey found 27% reported workplace discrimination. The EPI noted H-1B workers are often paid 20 to 30% less than American counterparts. And finally, 38% of H-1B holders reported limited career advancement opportunities due to visa status, according to a 2019 Envoy Global survey. Okay, I know this was a lot, but I do want you to keep this in mind while watching the next segment. Let's get back to the video. By moving jobs to countries with lower labor standards and weaker worker protections, companies can avoid the costs associated with fair wages, benefits, and safe working conditions. This has resulted in the loss of millions of good-paying jobs in industries like manufacturing, customer service, and IT. The Economic Policy Institute reports that the U.S. lost 3.7 million jobs to China between 2001 and 2018, with 75% of those losses in manufacturing. The use of H-1B visas is another mechanism through which companies undermine domestic labor. While proponents claim the H-1B program is necessary to fill skills gaps and promote innovation, the reality is far more cynical. Employers frequently manipulate the H-1B process to displace American workers with cheaper foreign labor. In numerous cases, American employees have been forced to train their H-1B replacements before being laid off. A 2015 New York Times investigation highlighted the case of Southern California Edison, where hundreds of IT workers were replaced by H-1B visa holders, many of whom were trained by the very employees they were replacing. These manipulations are not isolated incidents. The U.S. Government Accountability Office found that the H-1B program lacks sufficient oversight, allowing companies to exploit it to the detriment of American workers. The Center for Investigative Reporting revealed that companies like Disney and Toys R Us have used similar tactics, further challenging the notion that H-1B visas are only used when no American workers are available. In addition to offshoring and H-1B visas, lax border policies in some countries have led to an influx of undocumented workers, further exacerbating competition and driving down wages in certain sectors. While proponents argue that these policies help fill labor shortages and support economic growth, critics contend that they undermine the bargaining power of domestic workers and erode labor standards. A 2017 National Bureau of Economic Research report estimated that undocumented workers depress wages of less educated native workers by 4.6%. The impact of these policies on workers cannot be overstated. By creating a global labor market where workers are pitted against each other for increasingly precarious jobs, offshoring, H-1B visas, and lax border policies have contributed to the erosion of the middle class and the growth of inequality. These practices have also made it harder for workers to organize and bargain collectively, as the threat of job loss to lower-wage workers overseas looms over every negotiation. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of these policies is how they are often framed as inevitable or even desirable by those in power. Companies that offshore jobs are praised for their business acumen and efficiency, while workers who object are painted as protectionist or anti-competitive. Similarly, the H-1B program is often presented as a way to attract the best and brightest from around the world, while the displacement of American workers is downplayed or ignored. Critics of these policies are frequently accused of xenophobia and racism, a form of gaslighting that seeks to delegitimize their concerns by framing them as prejudiced rather than rooted in economic realities. In this way, the challenges posed by offshoring H-1B visas and lax border policies are not simply economic, but ideological. They are part of a broader narrative that seeks to justify the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few, while presenting the struggles of workers as the inevitable result of market forces or personal failings. Another challenge stems from the emergence of new forms of labor, such as the gig economy and the service sector. These new forms of work have disrupted the traditional categories of worker and employer, making it harder for workers to organize and bargain collectively. In the gig economy, for example, workers are often classified as independent contractors, leaving them without access to benefits, job security, or legal protections. Companies like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash have built their business models around this classification, arguing that their workers are entrepreneurs who enjoy the flexibility and freedom of being their own bosses. But the reality is far different. Gig workers often face long hours, low wages, and dangerous working conditions, with little recourse if they are injured or mistreated on the job. They are also subject to the whims of algorithms that can cut off their access to work at any time, leaving them without a steady income or the ability to plan for the future. Moreover, the classification of gig workers as independent contractors has made it harder for them to organize and advocate for their rights. Without the protections of labor laws or the ability to bargain collectively, gig workers are left to fend for themselves in an increasingly precarious and competitive market. The rise of the service sector has also created new challenges for workers, as many service jobs are characterized by low wages, irregular hours, and limited opportunities for advancement. In industries like retail, hospitality, and fast food, workers are often seen as disposable, with high turnover rates and little investment in training or development. This has led to a growing class of working poor who struggle to make ends meet despite working full-time or multiple jobs. And because service jobs are often seen as low-skilled or entry-level, workers in these industries have little bargaining power and are vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. But perhaps the most significant challenge posed by these new forms of labor is the way in which they have disrupted traditional notions of class and solidarity. In a world where workers are increasingly atomized and isolated, it can be difficult to build the kind of collective power necessary to challenge the status quo. This fragmentation of the working class has made it easier for those in power to divide and conquer, pitting workers against each other in a race to the bottom. It has also made it harder for workers to build the kind of broad-based movements necessary to challenge the entrenched power of the capitalist class. A third challenge facing modern workers is the growing role of recruiters as gatekeepers to meaningful employment and social mobility. In many industries, job seekers must navigate a complex web of recruiters and staffing agencies and spend weeks in this job application purgatory before even getting to speak with the hiring manager. This has created new barriers to entry and made it harder for workers, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds, to access good jobs and career opportunities. In recent years, the recruitment industry has grown exponentially, with staffing agencies and headhunters increasingly monopolizing their role as intermediaries between job seekers and employers. However, most recruiters lack in-depth knowledge of the industries they serve, relying instead on superficial metrics rather than meaningful qualifications. This leads to poor job matches and frustration for both employers and job seekers. For job seekers, navigating this landscape can be daunting. Many agencies require extensive applications and interviews, often involving multiple rounds of screening and assessment. Why have these processes become so unnecessarily long and cumbersome compared to just a couple years ago during the pandemic hiring blitz? There are many factors here, none of them simple, but this pessimist believes that one darker cause is that recruiters create more steps to ensure they remain indispensable, securing their own job security rather than focusing on the efficiency and effectiveness of the hiring process. Moreover, the use of hiring algorithms and automated screening tools has become increasingly common, particularly in larger companies. These tools are designed to streamline the hiring process and identify the best fit candidates based on a set of predetermined criteria. However, there are significant concerns about the fairness and accuracy of these tools. Studies have shown that hiring algorithms can perpetuate existing biases and discriminate against certain groups of job seekers, particularly those from underrepresented or marginalized communities. For example, a 2018 study by researchers at the University of California, Berkeley found that a commonly used hiring algorithm was more likely to select male candidates over female candidates, even when their qualifications were identical. Similarly, a 2019 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that job applicants with black-sounding names were less likely to be selected for interviews than those with white-sounding names, even when their resumes were otherwise identical. This power imbalance can create significant barriers for job seekers, particularly those who may not fit the traditional mold of a good candidate. It can also lead to a narrowing of the talent pool as companies become increasingly reliant on a small set of elite schools or a narrow set of qualifications. This lack of transparency can be frustrating and demoralizing, particularly for those who have invested significant time and resources into their job search. In addition to these barriers, job seekers also face significant costs when it comes to navigating the recruitment landscape. Many agencies require job seekers to pay for their services, either through upfront fees or a percentage of their salary if they are hired. This can create a significant financial burden, particularly for those who are already struggling to make ends meet. Moreover, the time and resources required to navigate the job search process can be significant. Job seekers may need to spend hours crafting resumes and cover letters, preparing for interviews, and networking with potential employers. For those who are already working full-time or have family obligations, this can be a significant strain. The result is a system that can feel rigged against job seekers, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. While recruiters and hiring algorithms are often presented as neutral tools for identifying the best candidates, the reality is that, aside from often being grossly unqualified, they can perpetuate existing inequalities and create new barriers to employment. These barriers have significant implications for social mobility and economic inequality. In a world where access to good jobs is increasingly determined by recruiters and algorithms, those who are already advantaged are more likely to succeed, while those who are disadvantaged are more likely to be left behind. This is particularly true in industries like tech and finance, where the use of recruiters and elite networks is common. A 2018 study by the New York Times found that the top 20 universities in the United States produced more than half of all the employees at leading tech companies like Google and Facebook. Similarly, a 2019 study by the National Bureau of Economic Research found that students from high-income families were more likely to attend elite colleges and universities, and more likely to earn high salaries after graduation. These patterns can create a feedback loop where those who are already advantaged are more likely to gain access to the best jobs and the highest salaries, while those who are disadvantaged are more likely to be excluded from these opportunities. Over time, this can lead to a widening of the gap between the rich and the poor, and a decrease in social mobility. If the lords of medieval Europe had their armies and priests to maintain their grip on power, today's corporations have their own set of allies in the struggle against workers' rights. Chief among these are the management consulting firms, epitomized by the global giant McKinsey & Company. Founded in 1926, McKinsey & Company presents itself as a prestigious, highly influential management consulting firm, claiming to offer unparalleled strategic advice to some of the world's largest corporations and governments. However, behind this polished image lies a dark history of prioritizing profit over people, often at the expense of workers' rights, ethical standards, and social justice. From its early days, McKinsey has built its reputation on delivering cost-cutting measures and efficiency improvements to its clients. Yet, these recommendations frequently come with severe consequences for the workforce. McKinsey's playbook has remained depressingly consistent. Advocate for offshoring jobs to low-wage countries, orchestrate mass layoffs, and impose draconian return-to-office policies, all of which have detrimental effects on employees' livelihoods and well-being. McKinsey's anti-worker agenda is notorious. One glaring example is their involvement with the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE agency. In 2019, a whistleblower revealed that McKinsey had advised ICE on cost-cutting measures that involved reducing food and medical care for detained migrants. The firm's consultants recommended that ICE save money by feeding detainees less, providing fewer toiletries and blankets, and limiting their access to medical care. For the migrant workers subjected to these inhumane policies, the human cost was immense. For McKinsey and its clients, however, the financial savings and power consolidation were the primary concerns. John Oliver's segment on McKinsey further exposed these unethical practices, highlighting the firm's pervasive role in shaping industries through ruthless tactics. In healthcare, McKinsey has championed consolidation and cost-cutting, leading to hospital mergers and acquisitions that result in layoffs and wage cuts for frontline workers. In retail, the firm has guided companies like Walmart and Amazon in perfecting just-in-time scheduling and supply chain management, creating a system where workers are treated as interchangeable cogs. In manufacturing, McKinsey has driven automation and offshoring, displacing well-paid union jobs with robots and low-wage workers in developing countries. The resulting wealth transfer from workers to shareholders has hollowed out the middle class in countries like the United States. McKinsey's influence extends beyond the private sector into government policies and public discourse. The firm has been instrumental in shaping regulations and policies that favor the interests of the wealthy over those of workers and communities. McKinsey alumni frequently occupy key positions in governments worldwide, from the United States to the United Kingdom to Saudi Arabia, where they pursue policies that benefit their former clients, including tax cuts, deregulation, and privatization of public services. This extensive network ensures that McKinsey's profit-driven agenda permeates all levels of decision-making, perpetuating a system where the interests of workers and communities are subordinated to the demands of profit and power. Just as medieval lords used their wealth and influence to maintain their dominance, today's consulting firms use their expertise and connections to rig the rules in favor of their clients. If consulting firms are the modern-day armies of the business world, the Federal Reserve is the king's purse, the ultimate arbiter of economic policy and guardian of the interests of the wealthy. Like the medieval monarchy, the Fed wields enormous power over the lives of ordinary people, yet is accountable to no one but itself. In theory, the Fed's mandate is to promote maximum employment, stable prices, and moderate long-term interest rates. In practice, however, the institution has often used its power to favor the interests of the financial elite over those of workers and communities. One of the most egregious examples of this bias came in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, when the Fed pumped trillions of dollars into the financial system through a series of bailouts and bond purchases known as quantitative easing. While these policies helped stabilize the banks and prevent a complete economic collapse, they also had the effect of boosting asset prices and enriching the wealthy, even as millions of ordinary Americans lost their homes and their jobs. In the years that followed, the Fed continued to prioritize the interests of Wall Street over those of Main Street, keeping interest rates low and encouraging speculative investment even as wages stagnated and inequality soared. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020, the Fed once again sprang into action to prop up the financial markets, even as millions of workers were left to fend for themselves. The Paycheck Protection Program, PPP loans intended to help small businesses retain employees were manipulated and often ended up in the hands of large corporations and wealthy individuals, further illustrating the Fed's bias. According to a report by the Small Business Administration, over 600 large companies received PPP loans, some of which were later revealed to have laid off employees despite receiving the funds. But the Fed's role in the struggle for workers' rights goes beyond its response to economic crises. In recent years, the institution has become increasingly vocal about the need to keep wages in check and maintain a certain level of unemployment to control inflation. In a now infamous press conference in 2022, Fed Chair Jerome Powell declared, "By reducing hiring demand, that would give us a chance to get inflation down, get wages down, and then get inflation down without having to slow the economy and have a recession and have unemployment rise materially." In other words, the Fed was willing to sacrifice the livelihoods of millions of workers to keep prices stable and protect the interests of the wealthy. For workers, the implications of this policy are clear. In a world where the Fed is actively working to suppress wages and maintain a reserve army of the unemployed, the struggle for decent pay and secure employment becomes all the more difficult. And in an economy where the rules are rigged in favor of the wealthy, the prospects for upward mobility and a better life for one's children become increasingly remote. The Fed's influence extends beyond its direct impact on workers. Like the medieval monarchy, the institution also plays a key role in shaping the broader political and social landscape, using its power and influence to promote policies that benefit the wealthy and powerful. The Fed's influence is evident in the way politicians and pundits discuss the economy. In recent years, there has been a growing chorus of voices warning about the dangers of inflation and the need for sound money, even as wages have remained stagnant and inequality has continued to rise. These voices, often funded by wealthy donors and think tanks, have helped create a political climate in which the interests of workers are routinely subordinated to those of the financial elite. Ultimately, the fate of workers in the post-COVID world is bleak. The historical parallels explored in the previous video offer a disheartening reminder that the struggle between labor and capital is a never-ending battle, and the modern economy has only exacerbated these issues. The globalized workforce, the rise of the gig economy, the increasing reliance on recruiters and algorithms, and the meddling of external actors like consulting firms and the Federal Reserve have created an insidious web of barriers for workers striving to claim their rightful share of the economic pie. In the face of these daunting challenges, the prospect of securing fair treatment and equitable wages seems increasingly unattainable. History's lesson is a bitter pill. While change is theoretically possible, it is often fleeting and hard-won, with every gain met by new forms of exploitation. Just as the serfs of medieval Europe had to endure centuries of oppression before achieving marginal improvements, modern workers face a grim reality where systemic injustice and entrenched power structures resist every effort at reform. Building a more just and equitable future will require more than just effort. It demands an unrelenting fight against powerful forces that seem perpetually poised to crush any semblance of progress.